Good evening, everyone. Welcome to St. Paul's Church in Nantucket and Music Monday. And happy Shrove Tuesday Eve, or Fat Tuesday Eve. And as they say down in New Orleans, laissez le bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll. Yes, we're in New Orleans this evening, and being down in New Orleans, Bourbon Street and all that kind of good stuff, we're going to play a little bit of ragtime, a little bit of jazz, and touch on some of the perhaps better well-known composers of those genres. This first one was called the New Orleans Blues. And it was composed by Jelly Roll Morton. He was one of the early ones, along with Scott Joplin, to write ragtime pieces, and it was particularly popular at the end of the 19th century into the 20th century, and has had some revivals here and then kind of thing. In my pulling together this evening's program, of course, I looked up, different kind of ragtime pieces, and I was really struck by the names that were given to some of these pieces. Let me just read you some of the titles of these rags. Ain't That Some Rag? Barbed Wire Rag, The Barnyard Rag, Beeswax Rag, Chili Billy Bee Rag, Dill Pickles, rag, and that actually was one that was written in 1911. It sold over 1 million copies, actually. Dracula's rag, Fat Cat rag, and this is one of my favorite titles, Gasoline rag. So pretty much anything was fair game when it came to giving a title to these pieces. Now, as I mentioned, Scott Joplin was one of the premier composers of ragtime piano pieces, and of course, The Entertainer was one of his most famous, and in today's world, probably if someone asks if you know of a ragtime piano piece, this one probably would come to mind. So here we have The Entertainer. Scott Joplin wrote a lot of things, not least of which a couple of operas, actually. But this one is actually also by Scott Joplin, and it's called the Harmony Club Waltz. So it's kind of an example of his using a different type that's not syncopated and not ragtime. So let's take a little listen to part of Harmony Club Waltz by Scott Joplin. something a little different by Scott Joplin, Harmony Club Waltz. So you'll notice here I've got my Mardi Gras masks, and I've got my tip bowl, if you will, festooned with some beads for those who are coming around so I can hand them out to the revelers. One of the things you'll know, or some of you would know, certainly that the colors for Mardi Gras are purple, green, and gold. And those colors represent something. So purple represents justice, green represents faith, and gold represents power. So that's why purple, green, and gold are the colors of Mardi Gras and what they mean. Now, as I mentioned, you know, the heyday of ragtime and that kind of music was primarily late 19th, early 20th century. And actually one of Scott Joplin's, probably his, other than The Entertainer now, his most famous piece was the Maple Leaf Rag. And that one was one of the first published piano pieces that sold over 1 million copies back then. So that's a lot of people playing the piano and buying that music. But there are still people who are writing rags now. This one actually that I'm going to play is by a gentleman, composer, teacher, instructor, Richard St. Clair. And Mr. St. Clair was born in 1946, in North Dakota, but actually he has pretty strong New England ties in that his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate are all from Harvard. He's taught at the New England Conservatory in Boston. He's taught at Harvard. He's taught at Phillips Exeter and then Phillips Academy in Andover. So he, you know, has some pretty strong New England ties. This one is called Raganella, and was written in 1989 by Mr. St. Clair. And as you'll notice, it has very much kind of a Latin or quality to it. So here's Raganella. Contemporary Rag by Mr. Richard St. Clair. Now, we're going to move up the Mississippi a little bit. This is a blues piece. Will be familiar to many. This is by, has words, as many of you will know, W.C. Handy, the St. Louis Blues. So, we're going to move to another composer that probably is not typically associated to New Orleans, but certainly would be fit right in New Orleans music, and I'm sure it gets played a lot on Bourbon Street. George Gershwin, actually. And so George and Ira Gershwin, major contributors to the American Songbook, classic tunes, and not only in popular songs, but also, of course, for George Gershwin, classical music, orchestra pieces, and so forth. It's interesting that, so transcriptions, music transcriptions are typically where someone takes a music that was composed for one instrument or an orchestra or whatever, and transposes it or transcribes it for another instrument. Bach did it. A lot of people, will take something composed by someone and then transcribe it for the organ or the piano or whatever it is. But it's always reassuring, and sometimes those transcriptions, some are better than others, and some capture the original intent of the composer better than others. So it's always encouraging or reassuring when a composer transcribes his own music. And this actually, George Gershwin took a number of his songs that he wrote with his brother Ira that were, Broadway show tunes and that kind of stuff. Anyway, George Gershwin transcribed his own pieces for the piano. There's a whole collection. There's about 19 or 20 or so. Most of them are way over my head. I mean, they're really good. But they're, as I say, over my head. But this one is mostly accessible to me. It's the tune, "Swonderful." It's wonderful, it's marvelous, you should fall for me. So this is a piano transcription by George Gershwin, of George Gershwin. And you'll see that it fits right in. It's got a little jazz, it's got a little ragtime. It's just kind of a nice, sweet piece. It's wonderful. Good. So, this last one, again, fits right into New Orleans, Mardi Gras, celebrations, all that kind of good thing. It's Alexander's Ragtime Band, Irving Berlin. He wrote it in 1911, same era as Scott Joplin, and they actually were acquaintances with each other. And a lot of, ragtime music was being composed. So as I say, this was written in 1911. That year, Alexander's Ragtime Band was another one that sold over 1 million copies. And in 1912, it also sold 1 million copies. So you think about, Irving Berlin died when he was 101. He died in 1988. And Alexander's Ragtime Band was written in 1911. So, and I remember reading about this at the time. So, Irving Berlin lived long enough to see this particular piece of music go into the public domain, which means for 75 years he was getting royalties off of this. But in 1986, it went into the public domain, and so anybody could, do anything with it. But he lived long enough to see his own piece, and others, I'm sure, go into the public domain, so he never could claim royalties anymore for it. So anyway, Alexander's Ragtime Band, and interestingly enough, this is actually not a rag, but it certainly feels like one, but technically it's not. So here we go, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Alexander's Ragtime Band. Thank you so much for joining me on my little trip to New Orleans, to Mardi Gras. And again, happy Shrove Tuesday Eve, and have a blessed evening. Take care.